This presentation is called Science Journalism Manual. It's a long presentation, but it is taken from a manual that is written by Dr. Hanan Badr. She is assistant professor at Cairo University, and Mr. Ashraf Amin, my friend. He is a science journalist and head of the Science and Health Department at Al-Ahram newspaper. The presentation has several sections. First section is introducing science journalism, and it has 3 videos and 1 exercise for the trainees. And after each video, except the first video because it is very short, I provide a summary, a very short summary of the contents of the video because they are important. Then we have a section on sources and references, a section on fake news, and a section on pseudoscience and implications of COVID-19 on scientific journalism, then translating scientific terms and impact of social media, and we end by a conclusion. This short video is called Art and Science, and it's a very interesting, to the point, short videos that describes what scientific journalism is all about.
Journalism is both an art and a science, and it demands a meticulous blend of ethics and rigor and storytelling. At its core, it's about informing, educating, and sometimes entertaining, but always with a commitment to truth and integrity. To practice good journalism, one has to start with rigorous research and fact-checking. That foundational step ensures that the information that is presented is accurate and reliable and comprehensive.
Explaining scientific advances to the general public is a worthwhile, even a noble endeavor. If you have a substantial background in the subjects you are writing about, you will have a real advantage over most journalists who typically are trained in journalism rather than science. This is an important issue because I have been involved in workshops, and in the workshops there is a good idea by integrating the knowledge of the journalists with the knowledge of scientists in a very interesting exercise that benefits both of them. Journalists are able to talk about scientific subjects, and scientists are capable of writing about their specialist subjects in a language that can be understood by the public. Scientific writing is also another interesting video.
Here at UBC, as part of an ambitious project involving instructors, staff, and talking squirrels, we are developing videos to help you with your writing skills. Because communicating science effectively is an incredibly important part of being a good scientist. An old friend of Grammar Squirrels has just discovered an interesting piece of video footage while looking for evidence of the Sasquatch in British Columbia. So Grammar Squirrel, newly appointed as journalist for the school paper The Nottington Post, has decided to write an article about it. But she quickly realises that this article needs to be written in a very different style to her lab reports if it's going to appeal to a wider audience. She first decides to get the facts of her story straight, and interviews Hazel to get the answers to some all-important questions. And then she types up a transcript of the interview after listening to it on playback. She calls her editor, who gives her the green light for the story. But she also tells her she only has 300 words of space in the newspaper. Grammar Squirrel realizes she is going to need to make every word count, but she's not quite sure where to start. She has over 600 words of interesting quotes from Hazel alone. So, she decides to go and get some expert advice.
One great strategy when you're writing a science article for a general audience is to include the 5 W's in your first 2 paragraphs. So that's the who, what, where, why, and when of your story. If you include this information up front, then people know what they're going to be reading, and you'll be surprised at how few words you need to use to describe the content of the article. For example, I bet you can include all of that information on the Sasquatch scoop in less than 50 words. That'll leave you 250 words to develop your story by quoting and paraphrasing material from your source, Hazel Digsbury.
Grammar Squirrel looks over her transcript and notes again and has a go at doing just this. It does take more than one attempt, but she's soon successful. In fact, she only needed to use 37 words to cover the 5 W's. In the opening to her story, Grammar Squirrel writes, "Local naturalist Hazel Digsbury might have caught a Sasquatch on film for the first time while exploring the mountains of Squamish. Digsbury was hiking with friends on Sunday when she spotted a mysterious figure in the forest." So in this sentence, the who is Hazel Digsbury, the what is the Sasquatch, the where, the mountains of Squamish, the when, Sunday, and the why, which you can think of as why is this interesting, is that this was a Sasquatch being caught on film for the first time. But what next? What should she include as she adds to the story? And how should she do it?
Once you've introduced the important elements of your story, it's time to use some of that background information and quotes from your source. This will liven it up and develop the story, and it'll engage the audience by making it more personable. You should do this by working down the so-called inverted pyramid.
As you move down the pyramid, you can start to add depth to your paragraphs and decrease the breadth within them. By this, I mean you can focus on one main point per paragraph and provide more detail about this one point. Much of that information can come direct from the source if you're able to use some interesting and personal quotes.
But there's a real art to it, because your transcript will likely show that Hazel spoke with gaps in her story and she wasn't always clear and concise in what she said. You should try to avoid using long-winded quotes, those that are tricky to interpret and those that contain unnecessary words or jargon. The gems that you're looking for are short, succinct quotes that add something to your story. And it's okay to change the order of her quotes around as long as you don't misrepresent her in some way. Always remember that it's very important not to take sources out of context. This applies to academic science writing too.
Grammar Squirrel looks over her transcript and notes again, but is still a bit unclear as to what makes a quote suitable or unsuitable. So, she decides to ask for some examples, and also for some advice on what to do with all the useful information that her old friend gave her, but which isn't suitable for quoting for one reason or another.
I've looked at the transcript and there are several snappy quotes that would work. For example, when Hazel says, "I don't know if it was a Sasquatch, but it was huge and running towards me," would work really well. But there were also parts that were confusing, where the English was broken or she was repeating herself. You don't want to be repeating information that you have already introduced in your story. And now for the last tip. All that interesting information that you couldn't quote directly, paraphrase it. Say it in your own words, just attribute it to her. For example, instead of quoting that part where she talks about the animal's footprints, where everything sounds a little bit confusing, paraphrase it. Say something like, "Mrs. Digsbury said that the animal footprints were a lot wider than a human's."
Grammar Squirrel, fresh from her trips to see the experts, gets back to the story with real excitement. She submits the finished article to her editor, and was even able to use a few words less than her limit of 300. And a few days later, she is delighted to see that her article is giving many of her peers a lot of enjoyment, as well as bringing science news to those who might otherwise not have been exposed to it.
In this video made by University of British Columbia, It's a nice video that shows grammar squirrel as she learns how to write a compelling, scientifically accurate newspaper article about Sasquatch sighting. Through expert advice, she masters journalistic techniques like the 5 W's, the inverted pyramid structure, and ethical quoting. By focusing on clarity, brevity, and engaging storytelling, she successfully transforms complex information into an accessible article for general readers. The video highlights the importance of ethical, effective science communication. Writing for the general audience by assimilating a piece of research published in a primary scientific literature and reorganizing that information to produce a successful piece of science journalism is an excellent exercise in summarizing information, simplifying complex material, and de-jargonizing your writing. Most important, writing for a general audience of intelligent non-scientists is a wonderful way to tell if you really understand something. How to write a scientific report. People often get mixed up with between different genres of science journalism: opinion writing or commentary, reports, and investigative science journalism. It is therefore important to establish what differentiates each type of content before delving into the standards of science journalism. Opinion writing or commentary. Opinion writing and commentary are widely circulated on social media platforms, but via pictures posted on Instagram or through videos shared on YouTube. Commentary usually conveys the author's own opinion and seeks to adopt certain stances. It will sometimes list data and figures without citation and without providing a means of verifying the information. As a result, commentary and opinion pieces often lack objectivity and present information that is hard to verify. A scientific report, on the other side, like scientific research, these reports will take a rational approach. A scientific report will first introduce the subject matter, then provide a short history of the issue and the questions at hand. It will then describe the experiment being conducted. Writing the report also entails identifying the subject's most prominent features, the research method adopted, and the findings, which the writer should then analyze in relation to the research questions. And these are a list of renowned journals. Perhaps among the most internationally renowned scientific research journals are Nature, Science, Science Direct, and PubMed, and I am providing the URL for the sites. Scientific reports and papers. Scientific reports and papers are generally considered to provide an exposition of impartial and unbiased information, research findings, as well as the methods used to review and verify them. However, there are a number of fundamental differences between scientific reports and investigative science journalism. Investigative science journalism is a specialized type of journalism to which the following professional criteria are applicable: reason for writing, importance of topic, timelines, target audience, geographical proximity, relatability, how and why, accuracy and clarity. And again, I'm showing you an interesting video about investigative report.
Hey, I have exciting news. My story about ToxCorp was published and it's made a big splash. The company released a statement saying they were cooperating with an investigation and pledged to do better to reduce negative environmental impacts. That's a step in the right direction for sure. I'm proud that my first big investigative story has had such an effect. That said, I got a tip about another investigative story, and I think it's time for you to take the lead on this one. I'll walk you through what we know so far and get you ready to take this case on as your final project for Unit 5. Today, we'll start off by reviewing the key components necessary to write an investigative report. And then we'll discuss the requirements of your investigative report project. Make sure you have your guided notes ready to go. So, what's the case you'll be looking into? Well, it all centers around the Relief Now Foundation, a charity that promises that the majority of its donations go directly toward providing disaster relief. However, recent concerns have been raised about how much of the funds are actually reaching those in need. Your goal is to determine if Relief Now Foundation is using its donations responsibly and to write an article reporting your findings. Charities are generally expected to spend at least 65% of their budget on direct services, with no more than 35% going to administration and fundraising. Is Relief Now meeting these standards or falling short of its promises? Let's take a moment to pause. What questions will you need to answer to draw a conclusion about this charity's spending? Pause the video and jot down 2 essential questions. What did you come up with? Here's what I'm thinking. How much of the charity's budget is actually being spent on direct relief efforts compared to administrative costs? How does the evidence support or contradict the charity's public claims about spending? Now, in order to answer these questions, what sources of evidence could we rely on? Let's start by reviewing the types of human sources. Take a moment to pause the video and complete the matching activity in your guided notes. Resume when you're ready to check your work. Let's see how you did. People with first-hand knowledge of a person, organization, or situation who can offer information that's not available to outsiders are insiders. Now, what about those who have specialized knowledge in a particular field, who can provide credible insight to help interpret data? Experts, of course. Next up, people who have directly observed an event and can provide powerful and detailed accounts are known as eyewitnesses. And last but not least, individuals who expose wrongdoing within an organization, offering direct insight into hidden problems, are called whistleblowers. When you analyze evidence tomorrow, you review 4 different testimonies: a whistleblower, an eyewitness, and 2 insiders. Now, what other evidence would we need? Yes, documents and data. Good thing you'll also be looking at some financial records and internal email communications. Now, do you remember the process for analyzing evidence to draw conclusions? Pause the video and label each step in your guided notes. Remember, you start by identifying key details in the evidence, like information about the charity's budget in those financial records you'll see tomorrow. Then, you'll want to cross-check the evidence, looking for connections and discrepancies between sources. And last, you'll connect the dots, finding patterns in the evidence. If you notice that multiple pieces of evidence are pointing you in the same direction, it's time to draw a conclusion. On day 3, you'll start organizing all the information you gathered from that evidence into an outline of your investigative report. Then, on day 4, you'll write and revise your report. So, what exactly goes into the investigative report? Now that we've reviewed key components of investigative reporting and discussed the process for your project, let's break down the requirements. First up, you need to make sure your report is well organized and easy to follow. You'll have an introduction where you present the scenario and purpose of your investigation. Then you'll move into the body, where you'll spend a few paragraphs outlining your major findings and present the evidence to back it up. And of course, you'll finish up with a conclusion. This is where you'll suggest what steps need to be taken to prove the case. Next, you'll be evaluated on how you analyzed evidence to support your conclusions. You should include at least 3 pieces of evidence, with one of those being a direct quote from one of the witness testimonies you'll look at tomorrow. Any conclusions you present in your report should be supported by evidence. Our next requirement is to adhere to legal and ethical principles. Your report needs to be fair and truthful. You'll present the facts accurately without falling into sensationalism. Of course, you must avoid making any defamatory statements, and remember, you can't declare someone guilty before a trial. Lastly, your report needs to be written in a journalistic style. Do you remember those style elements from Unit 2? First, we have clarity. Make sure your writing is clear and avoids unnecessary wordiness. Then we've got brevity. Keep it concise. No need to explain every single detail of evidence. And lastly, we need to stay as objective as possible. That's it.
The video introduces an educational investigative journalism project where students investigate the Relief Now Foundation's claims about donation spending. It teaches students how to analyze sources and evidence, structure an investigative report, and adhere to journalistic and ethical standards. The project emphasizes critical thinking, evidence-based reporting, and prepares students for future publication-focused units. Investigative science journalism. Science journalism is a specialized type of journalism to which now I am going to go through the elements of investigative journalism one by one, and it will be followed by an exercise that I prepared from Al-Ahram newspaper. First element is reason for writing. Are there any new findings or new information that call for renewed interest in the subject at hand? And for each of these elements we give an example. All the information about COVID-19 calls for careful review and publication, especially since there is local and international interest in any updates about how the virus is transmitted, methods of preventing its spread, available treatments, the feasibility of clinical trials on drug treatments and vaccines, how soon vaccines will be approved, and the differences between the vaccines that are being trialed and evaluated. The second element is the importance of topic. How significant is the content to your readers? An example is the pollution of the River Nile as a result of chemical waste will of course be of interest to an Egyptian audience, since the Nile is an integral part of people's lives as a source of drinking water and a resource to irrigate their crops. However, the same topic will not be of equal interest to an audience from a different country. The next element is timeliness. Scientific journalisms need to make sure that they keep informed of matters preoccupying public opinion at any given time. At the same time, as being aware of how able they are to produce journalism that will respond to readers' questions. For example, in order to cover occurrence of a natural disaster such as a tsunami or a tornado, a scientific editor should be able to explain what these natural phenomena are, why they happen, and what technologies can predict them. Again, on timeliness, these questions are important right in the moment of a particular phenomenon that's drawing public attention, but they are irrelevant to most people just a few days before or after an event takes place. The same can be applied to occasions of international interest such as the World Water Day, the Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and announcements of the Nobel Prize winners. It's important then for journalists to be trained to prioritize topics according to current events. The more the event or phenomenon has an impact on the readers, the greater the appetite for the topic. Then, target audience. A scientific journalist should be able to identify who their audience is in terms of age, gender, educational level, and which scientific topics are of interest to them. In the majority of the target audience are young people and teenagers, for example. They are more likely to be interested in technology, sci-fi, and futurology. It's also generally accepted that scientific editors should come back to their readers frequently to check what topics they are interested in or take note of the topics that are generating the most reads, comments, and shares. Also, on target audience, it's also good for an editor to venture occasionally into new topics. If an editor specialty topics are tech and future studies, they could potentially propose a topic exploring how modern technology is playing a role in football, for example, perhaps looking at the manufacture of a football or sportswear, football stadium cameras, and programs that assess athletes' competence. This approach could attract new readers who are passionate about sports and interested to understand the role of technology in football matches. Next is geographical proximity. People are usually interested in matters that affect their lives or their immediate sphere. A robbery or fire in a back street is more relevant to residents of that neighborhood than news on an earthquake on an island in Japan. By the way, for example, in Egypt, readers in the country were more interested in following news and reading scientific contents and updates regarding hepatitis C and its treatment than other countries in the Arab world. There is a constant demand among readers keen to hear about the latest treatments, how effective they are, and how they can be procured. Relatability. The simplest way to explain this is by looking at the Nobel Prize. Every year a Nobel Prize is awarded to laureates from the fields of chemistry, physics, and astrology, medicine, and physiology, literature, and economy. Though the awarding of the Nobel Prize every year garners a lot of media coverage worldwide, it was doubly important as a news event in the Egyptian media when Dr. Ahmed Zouel won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. The fact that he has an Egyptian-born chemist made him more relatable and prompted lengthy coverage of the scientist, his achievements and history, and his family. How and why? Journalists know that a news piece should provide answers to the questions of who, what, where, and when, yet it's also pertinent to acquire as to how and why. These last two questions are the main points that journalists will focus on when writing in an in-depth report. They can do this by holding interviews if the information is easy to get hold of from sources, or it's less available. They can investigate multiple sources in an attempt to produce their own conclusions. The example here are files have been put forward on medical and scientific policy that try to investigate how COVID-19 mutates, why it takes a long time to produce effective vaccines to combat the virus, how research results are translated into products and services that benefit the national economy, and why this strategy is less successful in Arab countries than in more developed countries. Accuracy and clarity is an important issue too, where every scientific editor should be well versed on specialty scientific topics and should be able to convey information in simple and accurate language. This can cause difficulties since every field adopts its own set of jargons that shape the foundations of the topic. You cannot, for example, discuss gene modifications and CRISPR/Cas9 technology without prior knowledge of genetic engineering. Likewise, you cannot talk about how black holes are formed in space without reference to Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity. A science editor needs to be able to simplify the subject they are tackling without shying away from the meaning of relevant terminology and without causing inaccurate or erroneous information to be published. Again, on accuracy and clarity, a science journalism editor must therefore ensure clarity, accuracy, and prioritization of most relevant ideas and concise writing. Science journalists commonly used the inverted pyramid concept to visualize how information should be simplified and results should be presented. To this end, I added this slide from literature to explain what the inverted pyramid in journalism means. As you can see at the top, the most newsworthy info answering the 6 questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how, and then talk about important details, and at the bottom of the inverted pyramid, other general info background. The inverted pyramid is a metaphor used by journalists and other writers to illustrate how information should be prioritized and structured in prose. It's a common method for writing news stories and has wide adaptability to other kinds of texts. Different from scientific research, this is an important issue. This contrasts with informational hierarchy used when writing scientific research. A scientific investigative report introduces topics in a simple way, asks questions and provides answers, as well as including other background information on the topic like social, economic, religious, etc. when necessary. In conclusion, a scientific report is basically a journalistic report about scientific topics relevant to its target audience interests, written in a simple language that is accessible to non-specialist readers without jeopardizing meaning. Sources and information in a scientific report should be reviewed and verified. And these are 3 references. Basically, these references is where we get the material in the previous slides. A specific journalism exercise developed by myself. The exercise is I give audience 4 recent scientific articles in Arabic from Al-Ahram newspaper, and for each article they should fill a matrix to check if the criteria shown in the previous slides is applied or not. These are the four articles. One of them it talked about electronic cigarettes, the other one called about bones of elderly people, the third one is called about biological teeth, and the fourth one is the decision is in the hand of the physician, not artificial intelligence. And this is a matrix that I developed, and the readers should check for each of the four articles how good, neutral, or bad each of the elements of the investigative report that we discussed before. Now we move to the section on sources and references. What are sources? Data and information are one of the primary foundations of any kind of journalistic writing, including specialized journalism such as economic or science journalism. In order to avoid circulating inaccurate or misleading information, it's necessary to cite where the information is from, so it can be easily reviewed and verified if needs be. For example, if you are writing about scientific journalism research in Egypt, you will need to refer to specialized sources that provide documented information and references. You could be looking to access information on the annual expenditure of scientific research, the number of researchers in Egypt, on how many research studies are conducted or patents issued, on how many research institutes there are in the country, and naturally, to answer each question, you would have resource to a particular point of reference. As such, you must cite sources when writing about a scientific topic. These could be institutions specialized in that particular field which publish reports and statements periodically. We have several examples. Example 1 is on January 29, 2018, Al-Masri Al-Yawm newspaper published an investigative report by Muhammad Mansour under the headline "The Full Story Behind the Discovery of an Egyptian Dinosaur in the Oasis." Here is the report. As you can see, the writer uses photographs and text, and it's really an interesting example. It's as you can see, it's a long article in Arabic. Though it is common practice to withhold the identity of a source in journalism, when sources are cited in scientific writing, it constitutes documentation of the information, even when the direct source of information isn't provided. It's important for a journalist to elaborate on how the information was gathered, reviewed, and verified, as well as the sources they relied on for analysis. This kind of journalistic writing, which falls under the umbrella of investigative genre, can do a lot to display a reporter's professionalism and helps them avoid being accused of publishing fake news. Example 2, it's another Arabic article on November 17. Al-Masri Al-Yawm published an investigation into water pollution in the River Nile coming from the Hawamdiya sugar factory waste. Even though no direct source were cited, investigative reporters Hisham Allam and Dareen Farghali explained each stage of the investigation, all the sources that helped facilitate the process, as well as those that hindered it. This investigation garnered a lot of attention in the media and prompted public debate around the standards for the treatment of industrial waste from factories around the Nile. The third example, on July 23rd, 2014, Al-Watan newspaper published an investigative report by journalist Gamal Mohammed Al-Ghattas titled Passing and Failing ثانوية عامة exams in the governorates of Munufiyah, first place Matruh last Kalyubeya Midway. Contrary to what is commonly written on results every exam, Ghattas focused on analyzing the information issued by the Education Ministry, which led to a number of conclusions that the authorities usually neglect to mention in their statements and press references. The investigation showed the rate of failure in governorates, which subjects the students fail in more often, whether their circular concentration is literature or science, and rates of students whose concentration is literature and those whose concentration is science. This indicated disparities in the quality of education in the Delta and Upper Egypt. Example 4, Jordanian journalist Hanan Al-Kiswani published an investigative report on Al-Ghad newspaper titled Scandal of Expired Biscuits Manufactured in Juwaida to Iraqi Children. The investigation revealed that packs of expired biscuits were being sent to children in Iraq within one of the projects of the World Food Programme. To verify the information, Al-Kiswani presented to be a factory worker and took pictures to document the expiry dates that were being obscured. This piece prompted a wider investigation that probed the United Nations, as well as ensuring that the disposal of shipment of expired biscuits. The reporter received several awards for her investigation, including the International Organization's Award for defending the marginalized and the vulnerable, and the Elizabeth Neufer Memorial Prize for written media sponsored by the Alexander Bodini Foundation, which is devoted to coverage of news related to the United Nations. The next subject is building contacts. Reporters work on developing and strengthening relationships with contacts that have expertise, knowledge, and information in certain areas, as well as experts who can analyze the data with a great degree of professionalism and objectivity that are of benefit to the journalist and to the general public. A reporter will get to know their sources by being persistent in attending and following up on conferences and various events. This gives reporters the opportunity to hear about the latest news, to follow specialist discussions, and to get a sense of points of disagreement or consensus. All of these ideas can represent fertile ground for reportage of or features. Stakeholders and diversity of information. Other than specialist scientists, there are a number of stakeholders who may have different kinds of expertise in the field of interest. If a journalist is writing about a new pharmaceutical drug, for example, they would need to interview the research team that developed it, published research about it, and obtained the patents for it. Such sources would be, of course, be able to provide a lot of information, starting with the inception of the idea to develop the pharmaceutical compound, to the stages of its development, and up till its approval as a treatment for patients. This would ensure we had a good grounding on the subject, but in order to cover all the angles, other stakeholders could be interviewed. The series of slides that comes after this one is a list of other stakeholders. For example, number 1, doctors who conducted clinical trials on patients. Here, the pharmaceutical company producing the drug. Researchers and independent doctors. Researchers and independent doctors are different examples. The health ministry and other authorities responsible for pharmaceutical drug approval and production, non-governmental organizations concerned with patient rights, and patent office. A diverse assortment of sources allows the reporter to gather more information, opening the way up and in-depth discussion on the topic. It also makes a way for aspects of the topic other than the scientific to come up, such as social and economic considerations. Professional standards. A reporter needs to stick to the following standards as their sources increase and diversity. First, targeting experts. Before interviewing them, a science editor will often need to find out more about the researchers and their work. Science journalists can also look up the fields the researchers publish in, use keywords to learn about the most prominent researchers in the field, inferring this information by noting how often their work is cited. Another element is impartiality. Reporters often try to be impartial and attempt to avoid imposing their opinions or viewpoints on others, to leave space for their sources to share their opinion. In a source where to talk about climate change, for example, and where to try and absolve the role people play in contributing to global warming, it would not make sense to give space to the source to speak on the topic given the quantity and material that has been published showing pollutants in the atmosphere cause climate change. Endorsing pseudoscientists that we're going to talk about later on, or research that cannot be reviewed or verified, is not appropriate. Objectivity and bias. On the other end of things, objectivity in science journalistic writing requires selecting trusted sources that have enough expertise in the field. Scientists could be debating whether it is better to rely on genetically modified or organic agricultural produce. These types of discussions can branch away from science into social or economic questions. The aim of these debates is not to favor one opinion at the expense of another, but to allow the readers to understand, think for themselves, and then choose what they see fit. This is a list of references as in the previous sections that shows us where the information comes from. Fake news. Here again, we are going to listen to an interesting videos that shows us how to spot fake news.
The following lesson will define and describe fake news and the steps involved in spotting fake news. Fake news can be defined as the deliberate falsification and fabrication of news-based information. Fake news can appear in traditional print-based newspapers and magazines, and fake news spreads most rapidly on social media. It's important to understand that all human beings have their own personal biases. However, in traditional news publications, the intent is to publish and present fact-based information. Fake news does the opposite. Fake news fabricates and creates false, inaccurate, or completely made up information for the purpose of persuading people to think a certain way and for misleading people. There are different kinds of fake news. Some include satire or parody, where the author has no intention to cause harm, but to make fun or to fool people. Other fake news contains misleading information. It frames an issue in a misleading way with the purpose to deceive the reader. Another example of fake news is where 100% of the content is false, made up, and its purpose is to deceive and cause harm. Other forms of fake news include manipulated information, where the text and images might be doctored and manipulated in order to deceive the reader. Here are 5 ways you can spot fake news. First, look up the author. Who is the author? Are they a reliable, credible, professional journalist or reporter or writer who is known to report factual, accurate, and reliable information? Are they known to be biased? And do they have a reputation of writing misleading, false information? Next, look at the date of the article. Is it actually reporting something that's currently going on in the world today? Carefully read the headline of the article to see that it matches the content. Sometimes the headlines are actually clickbait. Clickbait uses catchy headlines to attract readers into clicking, but it doesn't actually lead to the article. Clickbait is a form of false advertisement. Do some background research about the publication that you found. What type of source is this publication? Is this source factual? Does it provide biased or false information? A news source should have an About Us page that explains the purpose and the mission and the objectives. Verify the information you found by checking other sources. Just do a simple Google search. Are there other news sources that have also reported this information? Last but not least, it's highly recommended to consult fact-checking websites that can confirm, deny, and verify questionable information and conspiracy theories. Fact-checking websites can include factcheck.org, politifact.com, or snopes.com. And that concludes our lesson on defining and describing fake news. Thank you.
This is a summary of the video clip. This video provides instruction on what constitutes fake news and how to effectively identify it in various media formats. It emphasizes the importance of discernment in consuming news from social media, newspapers, and other sources to avoid misinformation. This section talks in details about fake news. Fake news is one of the main issues that can threaten a journalist's credibility and the credibility of a media platform. Though this term has been around for a long time, its meaning and connotations are disputed. It's commonly acknowledged that news containing incorrect information gets circulated on social media as though it were the truth, without any evidence to substantiate it. Sometimes, however, the reader will consider a news item that doesn't fit with their benefits to be fake news. A Handbook of Journalism Education and Training, published by UNESCO 2018, defines fake news as indicating inaccurate content comprised of the words fake, meaning incorrect news, and news, meaning information that has been reviewed or verified, to form a paradox since the former negates the latter. Types of fake news. There are 3 different types. One is misinformation. Misinformation is usually inaccurate content published without the intention to deceive, often on media platforms and social networking sites. Misinformation could happen, for example, if the source of information is a correspondent on a tweet on a news site reporting that an earthquake has happened and inaccurately communicating the number of people injured. This is usually difficult to verify right away and takes some time to confirm with the responsible authorities. The second type is disinformation. Disinformation is directed content that the writer knows to be factually incorrect, and that is being published with malign intent. It could be a rumor being circulated or refutation of other information intended to mislead the public. Malinformation is factually evidenced content published with the intent of purposefully smearing or harming someone. Perhaps the most well-known example in the field of science journalism is when a patient's information is published without their consent. Though the information may be true, publishing a patient's personal data without justification when it is not in the public interest or without their consent might cause psychological harm to them and those around them and represent an ethical and a professional violation. Guidelines for avoiding fake news. A number of authorities have published guidelines to assist journalists and academics in verifying information. These include Journalism, Fake News and Disinformation, a Handbook of Journalism, Education and Training, UNESCO 2018, the CRAAP test, LOTEX Quarterly, a list of 5 questions developed by the Medium Library staff at California State University for reporters to ask themselves as follows: currency, the timeliness of the information, relevance, the importance of the information for your needs, authority, the source of information, accuracy, reliability, truthfulness and correctness of the content, and purpose, which is the reason the information exists. And in the following slides we are going to talk about each of these 5 questions, as you will see now. Evaluating information, applying the CRAAP test, Medium Library, California State University in Chico. When you search the information, you are going to find lots of it, but is it good information? You will have to determine that for yourself. And the CRAAP test can help. The CRAAP test is a list of questions to help you evaluate the information you find. Different criteria will be more or less important depending on your situation or need. Currency, the timeliness of information. When was the information published? Has the information been revised or updated? Does your topic require current information, or will older sources work as well? Are the links functional, or these are questions under currency? Relevance, the importance of the information for your needs. Does the information relate to your topic? Who is intended audience? Is the information at an appropriate level? That's to say, not too elementary or advanced for your needs. Have you looked at a variety of sources before determining this is the one you will use? Would you be comfortable citing this source in your research paper? Authority, the source of information. Who is the author, publisher, source, sponsor? What are the author credentials or organizational affiliations? Is the author qualified to write on the topic? Is there contact information such as publisher or email address? Does the URL reveal anything about the author or source? Here are some of the extensions of values like com, edu, gov, org, and na. Accuracy, the reliability, truthfulness, and correctness of the content. Where does the information come from? Is the information supported by evidence? Has the information been reviewed or refereed? Can you verify any of the information in another source or from personal knowledge? Does the language or tone seem unbiased and free of emotion? Are these spelling, grammar, or typographical errors? Purpose, the reason the information exists. What is the purpose of the information? Is it to inform, teach, sell, entertain, or persuade? These are 5 purposes. Do the author's sponsors make their intentions or purpose clear? Is the information fact, opinion, or propaganda? Does the point of view appear objective or impartial? Are there political, ideological, cultural, religious, institutional, or personal biases? Guidelines for avoiding fake news. How to spot fake news? We given the difference before. An infographic intended to help academics to determine how accurate a piece of information is by considering the following 8 steps. Considering the source, check the author, check the date, read beyond, is it a joke, check your biases, supporting sources, ask the experts, and the infograph here. Consider these 8 elements. Considering the source, check the author, check the date, check your biases, read beyond, supporting sources, is it a joke, and ask the experts. Guidelines for avoiding fake news. Most reference material urges journalists and fact checkers to be skeptical, to question information and check sources. The matter becomes more complex when a science journalist is required to distinguish between scientific research and pseudoscience. Now we move to the next section, which is pseudoscience, and again I am going to show an interesting video that describes the difference between science and pseudoscience.
Had really characterized what science truly meant and what the implications were for the pursuit of knowledge. The traditional understanding of the scientific method, going all the way back to the ancient Greeks, relied on the belief that to look at the world with a scientific eye is to observe with no preconceived notions. You simply look, see what you see, and then develop hypotheses based on those observations. So you look at a swan, and you notice it's white. You look at another swan, it's white too. You look at enough white swans, and eventually you hypothesize that all swans are white. This is what Freud said he was doing, observing relationships, but instead of it being the relationship between swans and their colors, it was between particular human phenomena and human behavior. But Popper argued that everyone has preconceived notions of some kind. We all start out with a hunch, whether we admit it or not. After all, what you decide to observe is determined by what you already care about enough to observe in the first place, and the fact that you care about it so much means that you already have some beliefs about it. So, what does that tell us about Freud? Popper became convinced that methods like his that only served to confirm beliefs were pseudoscience, and they could be used to prove anything. Consider the existence of Santa Claus. If I try to find evidence of Santa's existence, I'm gonna find it easily. The world is filthy with evidence of Santa Claus. There are presents under the tree on Christmas morning, there's the guy at the mall, and then there are all those songs and stories and TV shows and movies. They combine to confirm your belief in Santa. But Popper would argue that it's only by seeking to disprove Santa's existence that you can demonstrate his unreality. So the question is, when we begin to test a theory, are we looking to confirm it or to disconfirm it? This is the key point. For Popper, science disconfirms, while pseudoscience confirms. He elaborated on this insight by establishing a series of distinct conclusions about science and knowledge. First, he said, it's easy to find confirmation of a theory if you're looking for it. Remember the presents under the tree? If you're looking for proof that Santa exists, you're not likely to keep searching for contradictory evidence after that. Second, confirmation should only count if it comes from risky predictions, ones that could actually destroy your theory. Because Popper observed that every good scientific theory is prohibitive. It rules things out. This might sound strange because no one wants to be wrong, but Popper says that every false belief we discover is actually good, because that gets us that much closer to believing only true things. Next, Popper argued that the only genuine test of a theory is one that's attempting to falsify it. So if you were to test for Santa's reality, your method would require you to try to prove that he doesn't exist, rather than proving that he does. So you stay up all night waiting to catch him delivering his presents. This is risky, because if the person who actually shows up to put presents under the tree is your dad, then you've destroyed the Santa hypothesis. On a very similar note, Popper also pointed out that irrefutable theories are not scientific. If it can't be tested, then your theory doesn't have much value. Like, you can only confirm that Santa is real by doing everything in your power to prove that he's imaginary, and then failing to do so. So you need to be tugging on Santa beards at the mall, you need to investigate reports of Santa sightings and other weirdos caught breaking into people's houses through their chimneys. If you want to be able to really trust in your belief in Santa in a genuinely scientific way, you need to put your belief to the test in every way you can imagine. This is where Popper says that you have earned the right to call a theory scientific. And finally, once you've disproven your theory, Popper said, you need to be willing to give it up. I mean, you can still cling to the Santa myth even after you catch your dad putting gifts under the tree by accepting his lie that Santa had dropped the gifts off earlier and that he was just helping. But if you're a scientist, you're gonna have to be willing to let your beliefs go, accept the evidence, move on. And this is the modern scientific thinking that we accept today. Testable, refutable, falsifiable. You don't seek to prove scientific hypotheses right, you only prove them wrong. A lot of this might seem so obvious that maybe you're wondering why we're even talking about it. But that's how right Popper was. He was one of those rare philosophers who actually managed to hit on an idea so right that we don't even really argue about it anymore. So it sounds like I've been talking mainly about science all this time, but Popper and his insights also tell us a lot about knowledge in the philosophical sense. For Popper, knowledge was about probability and contingency. We are justified in believing whatever seems most probable given our current data, and we should always be willing to revise our beliefs in the light of new evidence. In other words, our belief should be contingent upon the data themselves. This would not have satisfied Descartes, who was always concerned about certainty, but Popper never thought that certainty was possible in the first place. If anything, he thought being certain of something causes you to close your mind, and that's not what we want. Always remaining open to the idea that your current beliefs might be wrong is the best way to get closer to the truth. So where does this leave us? Remember, we started out trying to prove that we know the things we thought we knew. But you have to be open to the idea that your beliefs might be false, because that's the only way that holding on to them can really mean anything. Otherwise, we're all just believing whatever we want with no grounds for adjudication between beliefs. You should keep that in mind because that's the name of the game for the rest of this course. You only
Summary of the video clip. This video examines Karl Popper's philosophy of science, emphasizing his concept of falsifiability as the key criterion distinguishing science from pseudoscience, by contrasting Einstein's testable predictions with Freud's unfalsifiable theories. Popper argued that true science seeks to disprove, not merely confirm ideas. He maintains that knowledge is provisional and must remain open to revision, promoting intellectual humility and shaping modern scientific thinking. What is pseudoscience? In Science and Society, the writer Eric Swanson defines pseudoscience or pseudomedicine, a claim that is presented as scientific when it doesn't adhere to scientific method, or any belief held about the natural world with no supporting evidence. Popular remedies for chronic illness published on social media and news platforms are a common example of pseudoscience. UFO sightings, doctors claiming to have found a treatment for an illness without providing evidence or conducting clinical trials, and flat earther groups on social media. These examples tend to base their conclusion on exceptional cases or phenomena, or share non-empirical information on social media platforms without following the scientific method. British writer Ben Goldacre published Bad Science and Bad Pharma, exploring in both books various stories in which pseudo-medicine and anti-science was performed by interest groups, thus demonstrating the importance of balanced scientific inquiry. Science, on the other side, there is no one definition for the word science. According to Britannica Academic, science is any system of knowledge that is concerned with the physical world and its phenomena, and that entails unbiased observations and systematic experimentation. According to Oxford Dictionary, science is knowledge about the structure and behavior of the natural and physical world based on facts that are evidence-based, for example, through conducting experiments. The nature of science. Every researcher knows that science is uncertain and that all theories are subject to review and evaluation. Scientific knowledge is subject to be changed, developed, or adjusted as long as researchers and scientists pursue the scientific method. It is common for researchers to observe the phenomena in nature, propose a hypothesis, test the hypothesis by conducting experiments, collect and analyze experimental data, reach a conclusion that either supports or refutes their hypothesis, publish the results in order to make it accessible to other researchers in the field and the general public. The nature of science. This sequence of uncertainty and questioning constitutes scientific method of thinking. The more research results are weighted by new hypotheses and theories, the greater the academic confidence in the results and conclusions. Can research results be considered truth? In Post-Truth, published by MIT Press in 2018, author Lee McIntyre addresses this by explaining that a scientist's theory is not truth, but rather a hypothesis that is strongly supported by evidence and is subject to revision and assessment. Any scientific experiment is also limited by a specific set of criteria, subjects, and examples, and therefore doesn't fully reflect what takes place in reality. A scientist's conclusions must be objective and unbiased. Scientists sometimes observe a relationship between two variables and cannot explain the causal relationships between them, which calls for further observations and experimentation by different labs and research teams around the world, in the hope of reaching better interpretation of or of strengthening the existing results. The more similar the results, the more trustworthy the evidence and scientific theory. Hierarchy of scientific evidence. As the number of periodicals, research projects, and the evolution of medicine over the years, the need for quality of evidence, standardized reference criteria has increased with it, and the field of evidence-based medicine was founded to promote the application of high-quality clinical trials to research evidence-based and proven scientific results. Articles and research papers that convey scientists' opinions or results from a limited number of clinical trials are categorized as the base of the pyramid. If the quality of research and the number of clinical trials conducted is higher, it will be elevated towards pyramid summit. It's extremely important for journalists to use this hierarchy as a reference point to help them recognize which topics are worthy of being reproduced. Evidence and proof of the most reliable tools and for journals who want to refute science deniers and pseudoscience. This is a nice infograph that shows us another pyramid. It's not inverted this time. It starts at the bottom by background information as part of unfiltered information. Then it goes to another stage of TRIP database, searches this simultaneously, and then filtered information, and quality of evidence increases until we arrive to the top of the pyramid for systematic reviews. How can a journalist avoid fake research? It's important to be aware that pseudoscience is a current and ongoing phenomenon, and that It will be as long as stakeholders are able to serve their interest through it, and as long as it continues to influence the media and society. Before citing any research published in a periodical, journalists should follow the following guidelines. Review the researcher professional history. Check if the journal or periodical is published in and accredited. Review the title of scientific journal and its popularity according to the following criteria. Is it issued periodically? Is there a committee of academicians affiliated within the journal who reviews the research before publication? When was the journal first issued? What's the journal impact factor? How many times has the journal been cited? Again, a journalist must respond to all these questions and ask the same questions to the researcher, who will certainly offer support if credible scientific methodology is adhered to in their work. And this again is a list of references where the information in the previous slides come from. This part of the presentation is called COVID-19 and its implications on science journalism. Even though we don't have COVID-19 with the same intensity as we used before, however, the story and the relation between COVID-19 and science journalism has to be told, and there is a lot of lessons to learn from. The disease caused disruption all over the globe, which has altered established routines and norms in the daily lives of the world population. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, around 7 million people has lost their lives, and I looked into literature. This is very recent data up to May 2025. The dark number of unregistered cases of infection cases is estimated as being even larger. While the pandemic is global in its scope, its regional and micro-local repercussions have affected countries in different ways. The slogan, "Leave no one behind," seems too idealistic, since the reality shows that vulnerable countries and populations are becoming even more vulnerable, whether through the illness itself or its socio-economic repercussions. One example is the differing mortality rates in countries with similar health systems. Coronavirus has affected all aspects of life. The medical, social, political, economic, psychological, and educational consequences raise questions on the limits of human knowledge, the certainty of our decisions, global and regional injustices and divides, social cohesion, and the ethics of the public good. Journalism and communication have certainly been affected by multifaceted consequences which pose additional difficulties in an era of crisis narrative and the disruption of journalism. There are two contradictory effects. The first one, the pandemic is a golden opportunity for public service media, since it has increased journalism's relevance for the daily news for average citizens due to the rise of its new values and its direct importance to the audience. Suddenly, science journalism focusing on medical facts, science innovations, and health communication for the public has a chance to play a starring role. The second contradictory effect is that it's precisely due to the rising relevance of COVID-19 news that journalists have been under pressure to cover this issue, even if this involved real-life difficulties in accessing correct information or knowledge sources. The rising newsworthiness of COVID-19 has meant that pseudo-experts and rumors have been permitted to easily enter the public field. In addition, the social media, which challenge the traditional authority of professional journalists, are contributing to the rise of the conspiracy theory. The rise of the so-called misinfodemic means that uncontrollable spread of false information is accentuating but also challenging the role of science journalism during the pandemic. The duty of journalism is to shape public perception of coronavirus, scrutinize the government responses to the crisis, and raise the level of public knowledge about the disease without neglecting the interactions between journalism and the various digital media platforms, be it social media, search engines, video sharing sites, and messaging applications which serve as source for other kinds of information. Now we move to another aspect, which is COVID-19 challenges for science journalism, because science journalists face multiple pressures and challenges while performing their role. The first challenge is uncertainties and contradiction of information in daily news production. Examples of this uncertain and evolving data include the following open-ended questions. Can humans be reinfected with COVID-19, or is immunity acquired? How effective will vaccines be in containing the pandemic? How many strands of COVID-19 exist? How frequently will it mutate? How does COVID-19 affect some people severely while others remain asymptomatic? What medical care best treats the disease? Why do some people recover while others don't? How do infection chains start and spread in each country and region? And the last open-ended question is, why do the death rates vary so much across countries, even those possessing similar health systems? Beyond the medical facts and beyond science journalism, there are further questions of societal, political, and economic importance which encourage science journalism to look beyond the narrow medical facts. These are, with the new vaccines on the market, what distribution policies will make them accessible to the global population? How can we balance the economy and safety when we impose social distancing? What will be the real economic cost of COVID-19, and how can we counter the misinformation campaigns and conspiracy theories launched through unverified and unchecked information outline? Making sense of these questions can overwhelm journalists, especially when we consider that research cycles are slower than journalistic publication cycles. The friction between the two logics creates additional pressure for news media. The second challenge is the need for immediate and urgent information amid lack of sources. The third is limitations of areas of knowledge and expertise. And the fourth challenge is when politics interferes with COVID-19 coverage. I'm going to read this part. Political constraints on freedom of speech create difficulties in reaching out to sources. Several journalists in Arab countries say that official sources are not cooperative and only share rigid press releases. In other, harsher cases, journalists have experienced harassment from the authorities for telling deviant facts. However, there are excellent investigative initiatives and cross-national collaboration projects in progress which require a longer time to produce. The security-driven logic in handling eruptions of social unrests adds further challenges for journalists covering the pandemic. The fifth challenge is the challenge of misinformation and the need for major fact-checking initiatives. And the sixth channel concerns for the safety and security of journalists during coverage. However, with these challenges, journalism can improve COVID-19 coverage. One major widespread inaccuracy in COVID-19 coverage has been the focus on the absolute numbers while not contextualizing the numbers of positive COVID-19 cases within their social, cultural, and political contexts. Giving the proportional numbers of COVID-19 infections changes the evaluation of the situation completely with regard to a country's management of the crisis. Another point is journalists could balance the human interest angle with the medical facts in accessible language. Increasing the fear level only backfires and leads to the avoidance of news. The pandemic represents a chance to critically reflect on news values, such as conflict and celebrity bias in current media coverage. The opportunities of the crisis is that despite the challenges it has given rise to, COVID-19 has had numerous positive knock-on effects on science journalism. Scientists have now realized the increased need for accurate information, and this constitutes a silver lining of the crisis. At the same time, audience surveys show that pandemic fatigue and news avoidance are occurring as people state that news is adding to their anxiety. As the public needs accurate professional research and fact-checked information from credible sources, now more than ever, the pandemic is a reminder that sustaining independent journalism is vital. In addition, the focus on the niche area of specialization of science journalism offers additional opportunities and exposes the dire state of Arab science and science journalism. Good science journalism in the Arab-speaking media landscape are still rare. Despite the boom of Arabic content in science journalism and science communication in the last decade, they are not part of the daily dose of mainstream news. Future and junior journalists can develop their skills to fill this gap. Finally, despite the lingering effects of the COVID-19 crisis on journalism, there are also positive outcomes. Intensive international networking and intensive outreach through public webinars are important byproducts of the pandemic. Increased transnational collaboration among Arab journalists through social media is building on earlier activities such as the Arrange network. The promotion of transitional journalist networks through social media has enabled journalists to network and read each other's work, connect, and exchange professional service amid political constraints in the Arab region. And as usual, each section has a list of references at the end of this section. The second important section here is translating scientific terms. We call this series of slides common errors. After discussing most of the issues related to scientific content and its quality throughout the presentation, it is necessary not to forget translating scientific terms as vessel for these ideas. As a matter of fact, there are successful projects in the Arab world for translating foreign scientific essays, and several periodicals such as Nature, National Geographic, and Scientific American. Many Arab presses and journalistic institutions translate scientific articles and journalistic stories previously published in foreign periodicals so that the Arab reader can follow the latest international scientific research and discussions. Reading that most of scientific content is written and circulated in the English language, everyone who writes or talks about science in other languages faces a daily and continuous challenge in searching for terms in their own language that discuss and explain the meaning and significance of new scientific terms written in English. Some professionals are concerned with scientific awareness, science outreach, popularization of science, and science communication. The different practitioners are working hard to raise the role of science in society and its renaissance, and thus it is difficult not to agree on a single term in the Arabic language when dealing with a scientific phenomena or theory. This statement needs a lot of discussion actually. As Dr. Ihab Abdurrahim in the book The Arab Journalist Handbook, the translator's task is to acquire sufficient experience and skills that enable him or her to understand the linguistic and scientific meaning of the term written in its form and to work, depending on the second language and its vocabulary, to produce a term that achieves perfect reporting and good reception. Additionally, the science editor is keen that the information should arrive in a simple way, which puts him or her in a dilemma between the accuracy of the translated term and the simplification, which may be scientifically inaccurate according to the opinion of specialists. Here we talk about some important figure in Egyptian scientific history, Dr. Ali Mustafa Musharrafa, in an article titled The Arabic Language as a Scientific Tool. Dr. Ali, professor of mathematics and physics at Cairo University, published in the Cairo Risala magazine in 1933, he addressed the problem of many scientific connotations have formulas that are either weak or invalid. Also, in some cases, there are multiple forms of the same meaning, which leads to a kind of chaos in our scientific literature that we must avoid. This statement, even though written a long time ago, but it's still valid. In his article, he urged the formation of committees of specialized authors and linguists to translate and introduce terms. Dr. Musharrafa adapted the idea of using a foreign term in our language after it has been modified to conform to the taste and standards of the language under the conditions that this term is used in all or most of the other scientific languages, and such terms are often derived from Greek or Latin origin. we are in no fault if we derive our terms the same way others did. Therefore, I think Dr. Ali Musharrafa benefited from his exposure to other cultures and his vast scientific experience. Despite the old age of Dr. Musharrafa's article, translating scientific terms still is a major challenge for all science editors, especially if their daily work requires diligence within a few minutes to translate the news and its scientific terms. In general, scientific journalists rely on several paths to reach a clearer and more accurate translation of the scientific term, which contributes to its ease of use in the media and the localization of the term. We have certain paths for scientific translation. First, if the source of the news is a research institution or concerned with science policies or industrial and technological companies, press releases may be issued in several languages, including Arabic. And thus, the journalist can read the translated term and compare it with the first term in the text written in English and assess the extent of term suitability to the audience and readers, or requires search for an alternative term that is suitable and understandable. A lot of work. Second, the editor can refer to translation dictionaries and specialized scientific dictionaries according to the scientific topic he is translating. It is definitely better than referring to Google translations. The journalist can also refer to certain websites like unterm.un.org and also arabterm.org of the Arab Organization for Education, Science and Culture, UNESCO. This site includes translations of scientific terms in 4 languages: Arabic, French, German, and English. The third path is the editor can refer to translated news agencies when announcing the Nobel Prize winners and their scientific achievement. The editor doesn't necessarily use the same term, but it will be a guided step on the way to searching for suitable term for readers. Fourth, it is important for a science journalist to have a list of reference sources from specialized scientists in order to refer to them and discuss with them not only the scientific topics and news, but also the new terms, as this type of brainstorming helps in reaching the appropriate term according to the nature of the topic. These are some reference sources for technical translation. This is not the reference list at the end of the section, but especially for technical translation. Arabization Coordination Office, the UNESCO project to translate scientific terms, WHO Regional Office website for medical terminology, and a list of HTTPs like Arabic edition .nature, the Science Dictionary, alesco.org, umd.emro.who, fao.org, Quantum Arabi, and Glossbay. In addition, Arab Scientific Search Innovation or Subsidence, in Reality Challenges and Prospects, and we have here a website arabthought.org, Dr. Mustafa Musharrafa, the Cairo Risala magazine, and Arab Science Journalist Guide prepared by the Publication Committee of the Arab League of Science Journalists. Science, journalism, and social media. This is an important section. and the last section in this long presentation. Why it is important? Because social media represent a serious challenge for traditional journalism, competing with it and professional journalists alike. Social media is free, simple to use, and anyone can participate in the conversation. Journalism faces numerous challenges in today's hybrid media environment, which combines offline and online media outlets in a globalized world. The rise of the internet and user-generated content on social media, blogs, and other platforms had given actors and emerging actors the chance to co-shape the information environment we live in. Social media adds to the uncertainty of global journalism. Global patterns media use show that the young generation, the so-called digital natives, are drifting away from traditional journalism and traditional media sources and are moving towards online and social media. Once again, though we see very different patterns with 18 to 24 years old, the so-called Generation Z, this group has much weaker direct connection with news brands, as the statistic shows, and is almost twice as likely to prefer to access news via social media. A worldwide drop in newspaper use is also apparent in the last decade. As an example, in Germany, the numbers of journalism readers dropped from 63% in 2013 to 33% in 2020. At the same time, the numbers of social media users doubled from 18 in 2013 to 39% in 2020. The number of social media users is higher in countries with large young demographics, less established reading habits, and weak traditional media systems. Comparable results confirm this. In Egypt, only 7% of young people below 25 reads newspapers, according to a recent Basira poll. In the Egyptian context, social media has started to gradually replace and substitute traditional news media, which have been weakened due to political and economic factors. This crisis have overlooked cultural aspect which relates to the value and relevance of the offered information. Very important statement. From euphoric promise to dark participation. The word euphoric means excited, people are happy with it. The Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, based on interviews with several whistleblowers from the IT, AI, and data industry in Silicon Valley, investigates the question of why social media are so addictive. Social media are designed to exploit the functioning of the human brain. The longer social media grab the attention of users, the more benefits the big tech companies make. While social media initially was welcomed as a possibility to integrate all citizens into a utopian public sphere where values such as inclusion, equality, and rationality of communication were welcomed, reality developed in a different direction. Commercialization, surveillance capitalism, and using the user's data for financial gains. At the same time, user-generated content without proper moderation turned the participation into dark participation, and this is the reason for the word dark, which refers to the negative consequences of communication, including hate speech, populism, and inciting violence. Balancing state intervention and regulations from above with media freedom and accountability from below is a delicate tightrope act. The regulation of social media must not limit the scope of freedom or turn into censorship. The liberal response is to strengthen journalism structurally and culturally in order to restore its relevance and to build on interdependencies with fluid social media. Audience engagement on social media is a product of journalistic content produced by media organizations who invested capital in it. Sharing and resharing them on social media neglects the fact that original contents were produced by journalists. Draft legislation in Australia proposes that the digital platform should pay for news they circulate on the media. This is a controversial and ongoing debate which entail financial consequences for platforms such as Google, Facebook, and YouTube. The next years will bring the answers to these open questions. Beyond the crisis narrative, if journalism wants to retain its societal relevance and claims on authoritative knowledge, it must respond to the challenges posed by social media. New journalism models are turning away from traditional objectivity norms and openly embracing normative biases and positions to survive and change their readership into subscription communities. This emulates the psychological bonds which social media users feel with their like-minded peers in the networks, adds a sense of belonging, and affirms the cognitive bias which is the lifeblood of social media. What does this mean for science journalism? Role of journalism is to reduce the complexity, and no social media can claim to achieve this. As audiences always need guidance in daily lives, they will always require sources of information where they can find it. Science journalism has a niche market and has great potential to fill this gap. Science journalism has a unique position in the media environment because it attracts interested non-sensationalism-driven readers. It addresses a vast area of topics which connect to daily life, including medicine and health, technology and innovation, psychology and mental health, climate change and environmental awarenesses, and much more. This diversity and relevance has unique strengths of science journalism. One example of a promising trend in the current COVID-19 pandemic again, which has reminded people that traditional news sources, including science journalism, are important for the public. Journalism's value for the public good is being better acknowledged, and for the first time, a trend to pay for news has gained traction in the Western countries. As scientific topics need specialization, expertise, and authentic knowledge, science journalism is contributing to fighting the disinformation and misinformation prevalent in social media. The boom of Arab science journalism and science communication and its large reader and fan base, especially among young readers, is a promising trend. A relationship exists between science journalism and science and social media. It relies on successful initiatives in social media from non-journalists who migrated to show business entertainment, starting off in social media communities, and initiatives such as El-Bahrawy managed to institutionalize itself and has convinced investors in the media industries to produce a professional show. Social media contribution to science journalism. As you can see, the relation is not one way. It helps journalism find the sources and establish contact with social media in faster and easier ways. Being globally exposed to a constant flow of information stimulates new ideas. Additional interactivity with the audience enables journalists to see what triggers the readers and encourages the former to pursue their agenda and respond to public demand. Social media is connecting science journalism in informal transnational networks. Science journalism can support the fight against online misinformation. Exposing factual fabrications and myths can be of use to the social media platforms themselves. Social media corporates are supporting journalism through initiatives driven by Google and Facebook to show their commitment to truth. In conclusion, this is some references for the previous part, and these are my concluding remarks. This long presentation taken from the Science Journalism Manual, in addition to supplemental material and videos added by me, introduces audience to several aspects of the subjects like scientific writing, sources of information, fake news, pseudoscience, COVID-19 impact, translation, and social media. The requirements on journalism today are to connect to public debates and use the interactive tools to strengthen its position and transform itself in a global experience. The unique specifics of science journalism, namely expertise, highly specialized contents, and niche audience of interested publics, can turn this branch of journalism into a destination where readers go to engage and hang out. In addition, it highlights the current dilemmas and the paradoxical yet mutual relationship between social media and science journalism. Several possible points of cooperation are feasible, like traditional media use social media for outreach to the audience, and social media lives from debates and content created by journalism. Such in-depth coverage of the subject encourages both scientists and journalists to sharpen their skills to produce much needed information material to the public.